Hey, Gord. Look, I was excited to talk to you. We work with a lot of Microsoft partners. You work with dozens, if not hundreds, of professional services organizations. And I was excited to talk to you about some of the experience that you had in bringing organizations from a level two optimization to a level five optimization along that SPI research kind of maturity band. We're working with Microsoft partners, and we've kind of seen Microsoft partners, their business models change rather significantly. The move from on-prem to cloud has really moved the nature of their transaction from getting big checks for license-based software to now getting monthly checks in some cases from Microsoft, if not the customer directly. And obviously, we've seen a lot of pressure on software margins. We've seen a lot of competition changes over the years, not only from outside of Microsoft, other vendors, but also within the Microsoft ecosystem where two vendors are fighting for the same deal. I think it's more the case now than it's ever been, putting an immense pressure on these organizations to deliver gross profit or gross margin from their services efforts. It's harder to differentiate. You got pricing pressure. The resource costs are only going up, where I'd say, I'd love to get your take on it, but it feels like there's not necessarily an equal change with the billing rates for a lot of these organizations. And so just stepping back, I'm curious, what's your perspective on kind of what's happening with service organizations today?
Yeah, so just by way of recap, I spent 10 years as a partner running a Microsoft partner, right? So the company start was venture backed, right? So it kind of went from nothing to 400 people. So I think some of the trials and tribulations we had along the way in that journey are very analogous to this new, the sudden changes in the Microsoft ecosystem around software, right? So, at the end of the day, it's a fundamental business model shift, right? So, you add up your software sales and you combine your professional services margin, and, hopefully you take away a reasonable profit at the end of the year. When the margins on software are being compromised, right, then that requires a really tight consulting organization being run, and that's probably like a new set of capabilities. I've spent a lot of time, even when I was running that company. The name of the company was Ideaka, with a bunch of partners. We really started to, in order to get to Ghost, we had to isolate services and the efficiency of services. So I was one of the first participants in surveys from, Service Performance Insights, which is a services benchmarking firm. There's a ton of Microsoft partners that participate in that survey, a lot of them. And, the model is, it's kind of like 5 levels of maturity, initiated, piloted, deployed, and then institutionalized and optimized. And then there's 5 functions, right? So talent, operations and finance, service execution, client relationships, leadership. So the math in their model is basically the more mature you are in those 5 functions, the more money you make, right? So the margins, so most of the respondents in that particular survey are a low level maturity. They're 1 or 2. Right, the first 2 in all the functions, right? And so, they would be kind of break even on average, or losing a little bit of money. The ones that are at the highest level maturity are about in the low 30s in EBITDA, right? So to me, the overarching, like the big picture challenge is, how do we mature our services business fast, right? In order to enjoy those kinds of margins. And the maturation process is, all of those functions are like a set of wheels with cogs on them. So you can't change one and without the reciprocal changes in the other dimensions, because it'll just break the business model. So you kind of have to mature them in unison, those 5 functions. So I went through that journey in the spirit of having a very profitable, exitable business in the Microsoft space. And I think it's a matter of dissecting and looking at each one of those, and how can you make an improvement in leadership and client relationships and service execution, et cetera, et cetera. I would say that, they're all important, but the 2 areas that probably are most problematic maturing are client relationships and service execution, like how you sell and how you deliver. Right. So, that's sort of a broad sweep from my perspective as to kind of maturing a professional services company.
So you talked about going from, the level 1, level 2 respondents are at close to break even, and the level 5s are at 30%. I guess if we take that at, those numbers, and we kind of build out the analogy, if you're a $5 million service organization at 0% profitability, your service organization is probably worth closer to zero than 5 million. And
Yes.
then if you're delivering a 30% profitability, so in that case, let's call it 1.5 million. And if we do a 10x multiple on profit as a valuation metric, then you've got a $10 million company value, notwithstanding whatever the software contribution is to that business. So that flip, not only does it allow your organization to get the cash in that you can reinvest and spin up growth and probably live a nice lifestyle, but it also creates an exit for your organization that's much more meaningful after 10, 20 years of hard work
Oh,
in
yeah.
that company.
Yeah, and like, one of the areas, like, I mean, that kind of speaks to the leadership pillar. One of the things that's critical is, there has to be some redundancy around the founder.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's completely founder led, like they're, still the chief salesperson and those types of things, the private equity transactions I've been involved with will kind of suss that out right away.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so they're looking
And then your
for.
earnout is 100 years. So
That's right. Yeah.
for a while.
Right. Yeah. So that's important. And, it's often like in the Microsoft space, right? Like, this has been my experience. Usually the founder was the techie, right? That,
Mm-hmm.
knew the stuff inside and out. Maybe they were modern workplace, or maybe they were Azure, or, whatever Dynamics, right? And they started the company, based on their technical acumen. They're super smart, right? They know how to deliver, right? And they never get to kind of creating the team around them that kind of takes the load, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I always, I'll ask, a couple Microsoft partners, like, to the CEO, I'll say, hey, can you take 2 weeks vacation and leave your cell phone at home? Like, can you do that? Right. And
That's the litmus test.
that's a litmus test. If they can't, if you're on your phone, then you're not redundant.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great test. So I found it really interesting, some of the kind of metrics or the benchmarks that compared that level 5 optimized to the level 2 maturity. And some of them were around utilization, some of them were around average bill rate, some of them were around gross margin or gross profit. I can't remember which metric it was. Can you maybe give us some insights into what it means for an organization? Now, you mentioned 30% profitability, but what, like at an operational level, kind of needs to improve in order to go from a level 2 to level 5?
Yeah. So on, like, the to me, the key thing is really the connection between the client relationships, otherwise known as sales and marketing and delivery.
Okay.
Right. So the organization is selling things that are repeatable. They have a very good package around the service. So, like, the tasks, the work back schedule is very definitive with, like, skill levels, right? They can very, very easily predict, what skills that they need, because their services are so tightly packaged, right? And then they're excellent at developing people that are specific to the projects that are coming,
Right.
right? So they what the classic is, skills mismatch, right? Like, that is, like, deadly in a services organization, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
the sales team goes out, they sell a bunch of projects, and, you don't have the people to deliver them, right? And so you don't have them, you can't get them. Everyone knows how hard it is to get people now, right? And so you end up, putting a bunch of independents in at a lower margin,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you risk project quality because you're using too many independents. The project goes sideways, you have to recover it. And, you just have that connection between sales and marketing and delivery is really tight, right? It helps a lot, like, in that sort of context, right? I don't know very many 30 to 36% EBITDA firms that don't highly utilize a PSA module of some type, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not relying on some sort of mechanical thing or spreadsheets or something like that, because that's the connection between demand
Yeah.
and supply, right?
Yeah.
And what you have. There's lots of people practices, I think, that, are characteristic of a level 5 firm that, so, for example, they have career paths, they know what they are. The career paths and skills and all that relate to the service packages.
Mm-hmm.
So they know exactly what they're delivering, know exactly what the skills are. They do a very good job of developing, especially young talent,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they, they have the programs, they're going to the colleges and universities, they're attracting the right talent, they're putting them in a structured program. It's not a random thing like, hey, you're going to get a mentor and you're assigned to work for Gord for a couple months, and don't worry, he's going to develop you. When you can do that, then like you can create a leverage model that's actually profitable, because it absolutely is true that, the margins made on the juniors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can create them en masse and they're very capable, right,
Mm-hmm.
and you get the right people, it radically changes your profitability. The other thing that I think people practice is, so there's lots of service firms that have, you always talk about the staffing pyramid, right? You have like, I'll use a big five kind of context, but you have a partner, a senior manager, and then you have, associates underneath, right? And if you're selling procedural work, which is repetitive work, like a Microsoft partner, although they'll probably do some advisory too, right? That pyramid has a shape,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a real problem with delegation, right? In a lot of service firms, especially Microsoft. So you get somebody who's like the chief architect,
Yeah.
right? And they're like an MVP. They're they're famous at Microsoft. They give you
Mm-hmm.
guys projects because you have the best MVP, right? Well, those resources are really not always very good at delegating, right?
Right.
And they have to figure out how to delegate it, like in a developmental way, or junior staff, in order to bring them up. What ends up happening is you have like a senior resource that's maybe doing some junior work, like when you talk about rates, they might be doing $100 an hour work or $75 an hour work, because they don't trust, or they haven't figured out how to delegate. And then you get
Mm-hmm.
this ballooning. You're almost like a flying saucer leverage
Mm-hmm.
model, right? Where there's this thick, like big layer of senior mid-management layer kind of people, and not much underneath them.
Yeah.
Right. And that just destroys your profitability, because they're just, you can't get any leverage out of them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You see it, like we have customers that have like a Steve who's on, there's 50 active projects, and Steve's on 50 active projects, and he has no time to do any follow-up. He's got to be the one that leads every single call, and it obviously sucks all the oxygen out of the ability to kind of scale up your team and all that kind of stuff. But it must be hard for Steve. Like, it must be the
Yeah.
most stressful environment to be in if you're on the hook for literally every single project at the company. And when we were building Just Food ERP out of a nav practice some years ago, I think the first thing we realized, we had our main guy, a guy named Dan, and he was excellent. And he was the guy we would stick in to do the pre-sales and analysis. So we had this beautiful pre-sales to post-sales kind of continuity. And then immediately we started hiring people from the industry, people that had no implementation experience whatsoever, but they knew the industry cold, and they wanted, an opportunity to get out of that $60,000 salary band into the $100,000 salary band. And consulting is a great opportunity to do that. So it allowed us to create all this margin opportunity. They had an immediate credibility with our customers, and they were quick learns. And if anything, they were able to lend more value to our organization, because we weren't a bunch of propeller heads all of a sudden. We were able to speak a little bit of industry talk. But yeah, like, obviously spreading out that work, and a lot of that just takes delineation, back to your work breakdown structure comment.
Yeah.
Of saying, like, the senior people do this stuff, and then the junior people can do all this other stuff: UAT, config, test, the unit testing, training in some cases, support. There's like probably 80% of the project can be done by a junior to intermediate resource if onboarded correctly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that level of management, like the first level manager to senior manager that's overseeing work, right? They just run out of time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then they have people reporting to them, and they're not getting developed, and they're not getting delegated. And it's just kind of a cycle. You can probably, like a metric to look at is just kind of, voluntary turnover, like
Mm-hmm.
at the lower levels. If that starts to spike, that's because they're not feeling like they're part of something. They're not learning. They're, and the young talent now, their days, like, they're demanding, right? Like they want to learn, they want feedback, they want all that kind of stuff. And if your top guy is like, has 20 projects and he's managing people, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a big issue.
Yeah, and we've seen, I guess, recently, I'd love to hear your take on this. Like, I think COVID, I think remote working has always been a thing in our industry, and we've always had this kind of offshore kind of mentality, and communication systems allow you to like do that kind of stuff. You don't need to be physically present. But I think obviously, there's a change in the workforce. A lot of people are moving to companies that allow a bit more flexibility, hybrid kind of scenarios and stuff like that. From your perspective, how does that trend impact a company that's a level 2 to 5? Because I imagine that a more mature companies have more systems or more things in place to allow that onboarding and successfully running those shops.
It is difficult, right? I think that there's a lot like the percentage of remote work, in this particular industry probably is not poised to decline as much in
Yeah,
other industries, right? I
right.
think that the people strategies that like the firm uses, I've seen things like, Friday flybacks, right? Or where they collaborate in a space in person on a regular schedule in addition to, the remote work. So
Hmm.
some good combination of, remote management of employees. I I can't see company unless they were in like a regional center or something
Hmm.
asking for 5 days a week in the office in this space.
Yeah,
I don't think it's going to happen, right?
yeah.
But they have to be very deliberate about how they bring the teams in and get them
Hmm.
working together in order to get them efficient. There is a I think there is a place for when if you're using young talent, if that's your strategy, right, and you're hire out of school and you have a really good onboarding program, you're training them, they're mentored and all that stuff. There is, I think, a bit of a requirement for somebody may have to be in person for the first, 6 weeks or two
Hmm.
months in
For
order
sure.
to, and you have to have the platform to do that,
Yep.
right? Yeah, in order for them to be productive, especially if they don't know the space as
Hmm.
well, right? But
Yep.
you do bring up I like your point about, industry experts. I would like broadly say that, the soft skills are the things that are hard to develop. The technical skills are relatively easy. And yet,
Yeah.
that manager level tends to hire for technical skills, not soft skills.
Hmm.
And then you get a practice becomes, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just becomes like overly technical, and
Hmm.
they suffer in terms of, kind of cross selling, upselling, customer relationships, meeting the executives because they're becoming too one dimensional, like
Hmm.
technical, right? So if you hire someone from industry and they have soft skills, right? To me, that's kind of the killer hire, right?
Yeah,
Like
for
you
sure.
can train Azure Dynamics, whatever, right? You can train them on
Hmm.
how to do that. And I think there's a little less focus on that. So what I've seen clients be successful with is like having a very good recruiting process, maybe based on something like job scorecards where every job has like, here's the metrics for the job, here's the core values we're looking for, here's the soft skills we're looking for. Everybody interviews against that profile, and then you get the right mix
Hmm.
of people, and and you have to push your managers to think more broadly, right?
Right.
I've seen interviews where they're just like, you know, how do you do this in Dynamics? How do you do that in Dynamics? How do you do this? Well, wait a minute, like
Hmm.
what about critical thinking? What about all
Right.
these
Things
other
that,
things that make a good
yeah.
consultant?
Yeah, these aren't traits that you have time to teach, and quite often they're not even learned traits like work ethic, things like
Yeah,
that. You got to bring the candidate that comes with those softer skills. And I guess we've all seen the impact of that kind of fire that's toxic and what it can mean to your customer relationships and the team dynamic,
yeah,
and you always want to avoid that. And my experience, so those have always been the people with the experience and the resume skills, and
yeah,
not the softer
yeah.
traits that you identify.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the level five firms, right? The other characteristic around client relationships is they tend to have a niche, right? And they
Hmm.
tend to have like vertical skills or
Hmm.
domain skills that are exceptional that command a premium. So their rates are high, right?
Hmm.
Because they can, right? And they've really cracked the code on communicating thought leadership to the
Hmm.
market in their niche that people value and they consume. And so they don't need to spend as much, on general, sales and marketing. Like their sales and marketing efficiency is really high. I like to take like it's called a labor efficiency ratio. So
Hmm.
it's basically your gross margin generated by a team over their costs, right? And so you could take the whole delivery team, right, and then say, okay, you're generating $1 million in gross margin, but you cost 500,000. That's a 2-to-1 labor
Hmm.
efficiency ratio. And look at that. You can do that for sales and marketing too, and look at
Hmm.
the on a gross margin base, and you can calibrate that over time to see like good service firms, are over 2-to-1 on the whole company on a labor efficiency ratio.
Yeah. Yeah, the
And
metric in sales is often referred to as sales magic number, right? So it's how many dollars are you booking over the cost of that sales and marketing investment. So if you're spending $1 million sales and marketing, are you booking $1 million or are you booking $2 million? And that becomes the question, right?
yeah. And that so that's really calibrated well in the level
Mhm.
5 firms, right? Their win rates are like 8 out of 10,
So
right? Which is
so it's not a
yeah,
coincidence then, because you just said that the level fives already have like a kind of a niche play or they verticalized in some way. So you see the kind of the correlation between level five firms and their kind of go-to-market strategy. So that the companies that run more profitable service organizations happen to be the ones that have that more specialized skill.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And they market it well, like they can command they can command attention in the market,
Hmm.
right? And they're doing it a while, so they enjoy that kind of win rate, right? Which is obviously you need less sales
Hmm.
dollars when you're winning 8 out of 10, right?
Yeah.
And they tend to have bigger deal sizes, right,
Hmm.
as well. They're and sales cycle length depends on. I think that's not really necessarily a great metric because it depends on who you're selling to and how complicated it is,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, but they definitely have bigger deal sizes for sure, right? So I worked with like a Microsoft organization that actually ended up exiting, and their path to efficient service delivery was driven off larger projects. But in order to get the larger projects, they had to refocus their client relationships on enterprise clients, narrow down to a couple verticals, narrow the solution set to very specific things, and then that got them to higher deal size. Because if you have delivering one $500,000 project is much more predictable than 5 100 projects, like
Right.
startup onboarding, client kickoff, actually, like it's just way better.
Hmm.
So these level 5 firms, would have fewer projects
Hmm.
that that are much more significant, so that their business is more predictable.
Right. So we got a little bit of the larger but fewer projects, a little bit of the verticalization and that kind of
Yeah,
niche. Let's talk a little bit about the expectation setting in the sales process. One thing I think Microsoft's kind of running into is this kind of scenario where people are kind of divesting in the initial software purchase. So they thought they needed 100 units, but they're not realizing the value from those 100 units because maybe the project didn't go well or it's not quite live yet, and now it's 10. So on the renewal, they're going from 100 to 10, and so they're calling it true down, not true up. So it used to be a
yeah,
true up licensing where, oh,
yeah,
you have too many users, I'm going to send you an invoice for 50 more users. Now it's the clients or the customers are saying, well, we're going to true down our investment. So that's a customer sat, and that's like a value kind of, getting to value kind of conversation. Let's like maybe talk a little bit about that sales to service kind of
yeah.
experience. It could be the quoting, the discovery, the pre-sales work, the solutioning, all that kind of stuff in that transition to service. What are the level fives doing a little bit differently than the level twos around that stuff?
Yeah, so they in general, like well, first of all, they're qualifying harder,
Hmm.
right? They know who their ideal customer is. They know they're in a vertical, they're of a certain size, their people behave a certain way, and they're treating the sales cycle like much more strategically. So I'll give you an example. So and it relates to discovery and probably pre-sales a little bit, right? Is a client has a need, right? And they reach out to the market and engage a few Microsoft partners, and there might be a path to a very fast sale that's tactical, right? Where, oh, you need X, I'm going to give you X, and here's the price. The level 5 companies are really good at redefining the client need into something strategic, right? So I know you asked for X, but I can give you X and Y and Z, and it'll deliver these benefits, right? So they do that by, sometimes it's done through consulting or advisory consulting, as part of the sales cycle. Like they might come in and do, I'm going to do a blueprint, but it's going to include a business case, and we're going to look at like a 3-year time horizon, and we're going to lay out, a program instead of a project, and you're going to work towards this program, and we're going to have, metrics that we know when we're successful. And so at the end of the first project, rather than saying having a true down, they're going to say, well, this is what we said the outcomes would be. This is what the outcomes were. They're measured. Here's the value. And all of that was engineered at the start of the sale, right? It's the way that the mentality around the sale. I worked with a Microsoft partner, did a really good job of this. They were in the CRM, the dynamic CRM space. And as part of the sales cycle, they would write a customer success letter to the CEO, and it would say, this is what we're doing. This is the scope. These are the benefits. This is what I need from you. This is what we're going to provide, and sign it. Right. And so they're setting the stage for value right up front in the sales cycle. So if it becomes like an IT thing, or, it's,
right.
it doesn't have the right visibility, then you're going to have a really hard time, with the true up time, because it's not, it's a project, and a project without measurement.
Yeah. And I guess it's a real ask to get a CEO to sign something, right? So if I'm presuming that with that partner, if they don't get the signature from the CEO, you can start asking lots of questions to your sponsor, like what's happening here. Just because I think we all know the likeliness of successful project is very much dependent on executive sponsorship.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you engineer that. Like, to me, it's kind of like right from the first meeting. It's how you behave in the first meeting, and the kind of questions you ask, and are you talking about value, as opposed to talking about just the product and what the product does, not the outcomes that it can deliver. So, I mean, there's lots been written about outcome-based selling and things like that, right? That, I think are important, right? And, I when I was running or involved in the Microsoft space, right, we had that problem in certain service lines. So, for example, like, I'm dating myself here, but I'm going to talk about SharePoint a little bit.
Still around.
Yeah, still around. Yeah. But we would go in, and somebody would have an interest in a corporate intranet, right? And it would be a corporate intranet for our PMO office. And so we would, one strategy would be, okay, here's the scope for SharePoint, the PMO office, it's 30 grand or something, right? Like, great, we got it. Nothing ever happens, right? So we started to think about it like, no, like, we can provide you a quote or an approach for a PMO office, but we'd like to meet all the other executives in the company and talk about how efficiency could be gained in a corporate intranet, and let identify 6 or 7 other use cases and a outcome value of that, like what efficiencies are going to be gained. And then here's your program for a corporate intranet that starts with the PMO. That's a very different sale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
right.
So this is discovery. Like, the discovery was like asked, answered, need, solution, as opposed to taking a step back and thinking about making a strategic sale for the organization.
What are your thoughts on, I think, if you go back, like, we're dinosaurs, right? But if we went back 10 years, we used to sell, $500,000, $1 million deals, and now you're selling 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000, $100,000 deals because of the nature of the transaction being spread. With cloud, the nature of the transaction is kind of spread over an annuity. And then, to me, that's put a lot of pressure on service organizations, because you can't, it used to be like, oh, what's your software to service ratio? Oh, well, it's, 2 to 1 or whatever. So 100,000 in software, 50,000 in services, that became like a benchmark, or is it 1 to 1 or whatever. You can't really do that anymore. So now all of a sudden these services quotes are like up here, and the software investments down here. And to me, I think it puts a lot of pressure, if it's emotional or not. It just puts a lot of pressure on these great sums on these projects. And I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of, that, but also what you're seeing out there, because you work with a lot of firms, but also around like those quick win kind of projects, and those maybe fixed price kind of concepts that get high value early.
Yeah. So, I think people have probably a dated expectation of what services would be. So when you put a large services number, it kind of is a bit of a shock, right? One path is, if they understand the value of the whole project in clear business terms, the services number may not be as unpalatable. Yeah. Right. So the like the kind of upfront work, right? Like, Microsoft's a very good company for, commercial incentives, right? This pilot or that pilot, or this proof of concept, or this advisory use case analysis. They support their partners, and that's often the way in. Yeah, those are good, and I think that they can move the needle forward. But if it ideally it could be fixed price because it's so highly repeatable that you could do it in your sleep.
Mhm.
Right. And so, yeah, you kind of have to have that on those smaller projects in order to be even close to being profitable. And in order to do that, it has to, like, as we talked before, it has to be packaged. Here's the task. Here's what the senior people do. Here's what the junior people do. When you have it packaged like that, it also makes it way easier to develop juniors because they know exactly what they need to do. So, having the right packaging. And say you had a package for a use case analysis or something, right? For some piece of Microsoft technology, right? The first time you do it, right, you might not make that much money, but that is, as you perfect it, say it's a $50,000 and it costs you your 40% gross margin, it costs you 30 to do it, right? And you do it 10 times, maybe you're doing it for 15, but you keep a fixed price.
Yeah.
That's the model you have to get to
Mm-hmm.
in order and it's not easy, right? Like I remember I looked through the last SPI survey, and there was a large percentage of firms that have a methodology that aren't using it. Like, it's like, what percentage of your projects are done with a standard methodology? And it came back like 50%.
Oh, wow. Okay. And what do you think the reason for that is?
I think it's training.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think it's the really sharp, really experienced people that are taking a disproportionate amount of the load. Just do it. Like, I know how to do this. I don't need to do it in this particular way. I don't need to produce this document. I'm going to configure this because I know how to do it. I've done it a million times, right? So it's kind of a bit of rogue delivery,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't, the methodology doesn't stick.
Yeah, I've definitely found, even if there's like a PMO concept or a leader in service organizations, I've always found that the project manager tends to determine how the painting's painted. Like, there's an art element, not a science element. And in some ironic way, the reluctance is at the PM level, where the PM wants to use the project template that they've worked with in the past, or the communication tools that they've used in the past. Like, for example, like the weekly project status meeting, like they will spend 4 hours and half their PM budget producing this document because it takes so long to produce. And where that might not be part of the methodology at all, or like how you work structure the project is entirely different from one PM to the next. And of course, you get variability in the customer experience. And quite often, it's very difficult to track in absence of having a PSA or some sort of consistent method to track project A versus project B. It's really hard to figure out, well, why did project B go off the rails?
Yeah, because you don't have a standard way to look at it, right? Yeah, we actually introduced a position in my firm that was chief methodologist.
Interesting.
That's all they did.
Yeah.
Adoption and assessment and compliance around methodology.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's like, how many times you get kicked in the butt and you're like, oh, we should have put this in the statement of work, that here's the customer assumption, and we're never going to experience this again because we're going to cover ourselves with this statement. And then, of course, that never gets into any statement of work ever again.
Ever, yeah. Well, like a good service package, a good service productization starts in sales.
Yeah,
like
of course.
all the assets. Yeah, so people think when I say that, they say, oh, you mean, okay, this is just templated delivery. No. It's that, a lot of other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it sets the right expectation with the customer. It allows the seller to very quickly turn around proposals and be able to define for the potential customer what the process is and what's required. I mean, it'll certainly shoot up your win rate. The buyers can be like, oh, these guys know what's going on. They have a template for it. They've clearly done this before. The confidence level will be, that is in itself a differentiation.
Yeah. And in the productization area, I'm starting to see like generative AI creep into, and it's probably a good thing, right? There's certain deliverables or certain repeatable pieces of work that lend themselves well to generative AI, right? And the reason why I mention it, because I think it affects the leverage model, right? So I'm aware of an implementation going on with a big 5 company, and it's a CRM related initiative, and they've created 2 implementation assistants for the consultants, in addition to a couple of consultants, and they're delivering a big project with like a very different leverage model because they can use generative, like they're doing some coding, right? So obviously
Mhm.
that's fairly supported by various models, right? And so the like I think the ratio of senior to junior, depending on the amount of work, right, may change a little bit.
Mhm.
And the organizations that are figuring out ways to use generative AI in the delivery will end up with a lower cost structure.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. I know you're doing a lot of stuff with Copilot and I guess by extension AI with services firms. Maybe you gave us one example there. What are some of the other benefits that you're finding?
Yeah, so there was a couple studies that this is more broadly in professional services, but I'll share
Mhm.
them with you. One
Sure.
story and one study, right? So the Boston Consulting Group, last year they wanted to test the productivity effectiveness of generative AI with their consultants. So they separated their two cohorts of consultants. One 700 had a generative AI tool, 700 did not, and they measured their performance over a 6-month span. So the consultants that had generative AI were 12% more productive, 25% faster, 40% higher quality. And the underperforming consultants that were junior, they moved up the performance scale faster than they would otherwise.
Oh, wow.
Right. So that's pretty compelling,
Yeah.
right? In terms of productivity improvement. And then I saw this story, it was about an exit actually. There was a firm that was in the environmental engineering space, and it was a very, very small firm. They were like 10 people, but they were all 10 very senior people. And the owner was trying to exit, and nobody wanted to touch him because there's too many senior staff involved,
Hmm.
right? So he re-engineered his model that more intermediate resources with generative AI supporting certain functions. They were producing these deliverables that were like 800 pages long, right?
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
yeah, impact assessments, all manual, heavy
Hmm.
talent, big salaries, and they re-engineered it with more intermediate and Gen AI.
Hmm.
And he kept his revenue the same. The margins were better, but it de-risked the sale for
Yeah.
the because the acquiring entities would look at it and say, well, like two of these guys leave and we're done. Like
Yeah.
we can't deliver,
Yeah.
right? So that I thought that was kind of an interesting story too
Yeah.
around.
It's little, it's anecdotal, but I think
Yeah,
everybody can relate to them, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
so I think the implication is, it's not like a silver bullet generative
Hmm.
AI, but it would behoove anyone who wants to have a top service delivery organization to start playing with it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Our organizations are working together now. I used to be a client of your services some years ago, and then now your firm is working with our firm under the banner of R40 Performance, which basically marries. We've long thought, like when we went out and built the best technology stack we could for Microsoft partners to run more efficient businesses, we always knew that technology can only get you so far, right? There's that, that obviously the answer is that technology can't do everything alone, singularly or alone. It needs a combination of frameworks or process and people development. So we're excited to work with you on the process and people development front under a banner of R40 Performance. And R40 is basically just a take on Rule of 40, where I think we both know that organizations that can achieve a combination of growth and profitability. For example, if you're growing at 20% and profitable 20% a year, rule of 40, 20 plus 20 equals 40. Companies that hit rule of 40 are valued at double the valuation multiple of companies that can't achieve rule of 40. That is just data. That we see that in transactions at Carta.com and others are tracking. I think that was a McKinsey study from 2022. So we started working together with the idea of bringing some of your expertise in process and people with our expertise in technology. So we're very excited about that. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that kind of blueprint, professional service blueprint product that
Yeah.
we have available and kind of some of the things, how an engagement kind of unfolds and what are some of the outcomes that you would, as a firm, get out of this blueprint?
Yeah. So we have we call it a growth blueprint, and it involves working with the service side of a business, right?
Hmm.
So like a Microsoft partner, for example, and we would look at the 5 pillars that I spoke about earlier, right? Like
Hmm.
leadership, client relationships, service delivery, talent, finance, and operations, and we would compare the firm's performance to their peers, right, to see where they could unlock more value, and more importantly, how could they mature that area to get to higher profitability? And so we do that assessment. That's part of the blueprint. But then we would say, okay, well, here's a series of initiatives that would move your maturity in all areas from one level to the next, and they would be cascaded in sequence in a way that makes sense, right? And then those initiatives would involve like people related things, right? It could be training, it could be process improvement. They would involve technology related things, like here's some areas where you can use technology, and it covers again people, process, technology. And so there'd be a series of initiatives, and it would extrapolate where, like, what would be the impact, like, if you did this and this, would it affect your gross margins? Yeah, it probably would, right? And here's what kind of improvement you get. So that often provides I would say like an enterprise view of improvement in a Microsoft partner or service firms that they can then act on. So what happens is, and like, it's a series of isolated things that are like, the delivery team is going to change the project profitability calculator, and not really have the sales team involved. And then, you get these sort of isolated pockets of innovation that are good, but they're not comprehensive or holistic so that they actually move the whole organization forward. So that's kind of what it goes. So it's setting you up for growth. That's why it's called a growth, not just in terms of revenue, but in terms of EBITDA.
Right. Yeah. Because profitable and efficient growth is everything right now. Like the companies that we serve don't have, money cannons. A lot of these venture-backed firms have infinite dollars, and the only thing that matters is growth. It doesn't matter how much it costs. The customers that we serve and you serve have no choice but to grow profitably.
Right.
And that efficiency is much harder to come by.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Very good. Well, listen, Gord, it's been great chatting. I really looking forward to bringing the professional services growth blueprint to our customers. And before we go, I wanted to ask your opinion and you've been working with these kind of PSA, professional service automation tools, for some time, and we've seen kind of different flavors of, project management tools versus PSAs, and there's a bunch of vendors out there. There's no shortage of vendors. So, speaking, I guess, more generically, what have you seen? Because you made a note earlier that there's a correlation between companies that are achieving level 5 and automating their business with some sort of tool versus doing everything manually. But what are some of the main benefits that you're seeing with companies that are using systems like TechStack, PSA related systems? Yeah.
So, I mean, resource management, like, is sort of a key, like, so getting the right people, knowing what you have, what your capacity is, scheduling it. I mean, it would have a tie into recruiting, right? I think, like, giving the project manager the tools that make it easy to report on the effectiveness of a project, I think, is really important. I think, like, in many cases, the alignment between sales and delivery can happen inside a PMO, especially if it has CRM capabilities, right? If you can capture the opportunity, and then it flows right into, which is not always possible with some solutions, right? They tend to be, like, I know the vendor landscape pretty well. Some of them are pretty light on CRM.
Yeah, a little siloed as well. Yeah,
a little siloed, right? When you have the two together, right, in a platform that's super powerful because it gets that alignment. So those are the kind of resource management, PMO, and sales and marketing and delivery integration.
Right on. Well, I appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
thanks for your time, Mark. It's great working with you guys. Looking forward to more sessions like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Gord.